My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and at my own daughter's wedding, a wedding I paid for, she stood up and called my life's work an adorable midlife crisis in front of 200 people. The laughing stopped when her new husband's boss interrupted the music, took the stage, and announced to the entire room that I was his new owner. It's a long story, but I have a feeling some of you might understand. Before I get into it, I'd love to know where you're all listening from tonight. What country are you in? What time is it there? Let me know in the comments below. It's comforting to know we're not alone, no matter the time of day. The story doesn't start with the sting of humiliation at the wedding. It starts 3 years earlier, with the sterile, quiet cold of a corporate office that had been my second home for 30 years. And it starts again, a few days before the wedding, in a bustling coffee shop that felt a universe away from my life. I was sitting at a small table, the scent of burnt espresso and steamed milk thick in the air. On the screen of my laptop was a banking confirmation page. A single transaction, a wire transfer with enough zeros to make my hand tremble slightly as I'd clicked confirm just moments before. The recipient was Evergreen Gardens and Catering, the final vendor for my daughter Emily's wedding. The memo line was simple: a wedding gift for Emily. A wave of something heavy and bittersweet washed over me. It was the same feeling I'd had for the last few years, a strange mix of fierce pride and a deep, gnawing loneliness. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was bitter, and it suited my mood perfectly. My mind drifted back to that Tuesday afternoon. 3 years ago, I was called into a glass-walled conference room. My boss, a man 20 years my junior, who I had personally trained, sat next to an HR representative I'd never seen before. They didn't offer me water. "Margaret," my boss started, avoiding my eyes and staring at a spot on the polished mahogany table. "As you know, the company is going through a significant restructuring. We're looking to enhance our synergies moving forward." Synergies, restructuring. It was all meaningless corporate jargon designed to soften a hard, ugly truth. After 30 years as the office manager, the woman who knew where every file was, who planned every Christmas party, who remembered every employee's birthday, I was being discarded. My 30 years of loyalty, of working late, of sacrificing weekends, had been reduced to a memo about synergies. They told me my position was being eliminated. They offered me a severance package that was a calculated insult, handed me a cardboard box, and had security escort me out. Not because I was a threat, but because it was procedure. I remember walking out into the bright afternoon sun, clutching that box filled with a cheap mug, a few framed photos, and 3 decades of my life. I didn't cry. I was in a state of shock, a hollowed-out feeling that left me breathless. I called Emily first. I thought she would be furious on my behalf. I thought she would rush to my side, wrap me in a hug, and tell me how unfair it all was. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice distracted. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Well, maybe it's for the best. You've been working so hard for so long." "But Emily, this was my career." I tried to explain, my voice cracking for the first time. It was my life." I know," she said, a touch of impatience in her tone. "But look on the bright side. Now you can relax. You can do some gardening, maybe take a baking class. That's what people your age are supposed to do, right? Enjoy retirement?" Retirement. I was 59. I felt like she had patted me on the head through the phone. She didn't see me as a professional who had been wrongly dismissed. She saw me as a caricature of an old woman ready to be put out to pasture. The conversation ended quickly after that. She had a yoga class to get to. That conversation was the spark. The condescension in her voice, the casual dismissal of my entire professional life lit a fire in me that I thought had long since burned out. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about proving to my daughter and to myself that my expiration date hadn't arrived. So I did something crazy. I took my meager severance, cashed in a small 401 I had painstakingly built, and started my own consulting firm from my dining room table, MW Ventures. M for Margaret, W for Wilson. It sounded grander than it was. At first, it was just me and my old Rolodex. I helped small businesses streamline their operations, the very thing I'd been an expert at for 30 years. But the fire in me was relentless. I worked 18-hour days. I taught myself about acquisitions, about leveraged buyouts, about market trends. I found undervalued companies, businesses with good bones that were being mismanaged. I used my initial profits to invest, to acquire one small manufacturing plant in Ohio, a struggling logistics company in Pennsylvania, a tech startup in Austin. In 3 years, my dining room table operation had grown into a holding company with a portfolio worth over $60 million. I had done it all in secret, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew my family, especially Emily, would never understand. To them, it was Mom's little hobby. It was my cute little project to keep me busy. They had no idea. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I looked back at the screen, at the wired transfer confirmation. This wedding was costing a fortune, a lavish affair Emily had dreamed of since she was a little girl. Her fiancé, James, was a nice enough boy, an ambitious junior executive at a tech firm called Sterling Technologies. His family's was contributing, but Emily came to me with puppy dog eyes, lamenting how they couldn't afford the venue she truly wanted. So I offered to pay for half of it, a small fortune. I told myself it was an investment in her happiness. But if I was being honest, deep down, I hoped it would be an investment in us. I hoped that by giving her this grand gesture, this fairy tale wedding, she might finally see me, not as a silly old woman with a hobby, but as her mother, a woman of substance and success who loved her enough to give her the world. As I closed my laptop and stood to leave the coffee shop, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if she saw the money not as a gift of love, but as something she was simply entitled to? The thought was so cold, so sharp, it felt like a shard of ice in my heart. I pushed it away. This was her wedding. It was going to be a happy day. I wouldn't let anything spoil it. I didn't know then that the person who would try to spoil it most of all would be Emily herself. The week leading up to the wedding was a masterclass in passive aggression, and Emily was the professor. Every interaction was laced with a subtle condescension that left me feeling small and foolish. We met for a final planning lunch a few days before the ceremony. Me, Emily, and her fiancé, James, at a restaurant that was far too trendy and loud for a real conversation. Emily spent most of the time scrolling through her phone, showing James different Instagram filters she was considering for the official wedding hashtag. "Mom, did you talk to the florist about the centerpieces?" she asked, not looking up. "I texted you a picture. I want the peonies to be a blush pink, not a baby pink. There's a difference." "I spoke with her yesterday, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She has the exact color swatch you sent." "Good," she said, tapping away, "because the last thing we need is for the floral arrangements to clash with the bridesmaids' dresses. It would ruin the entire aesthetic." James, to his credit, seemed to notice my discomfort. He was a young man on the rise, handsome and ambitious, working in marketing at Sterling Technologies. He always treated me with a polite, if slightly patronizing, deference. "Everything is going to be perfect, Em," he said, placing a hand on her arm. "Your mom has been amazing. We couldn't have done this without her." "I know," Emily said, finally putting her phone down but not looking at me. She looked at James. "It's just, this is the most important day of my life. Everything has to be flawless." I tried to steer the conversation towards something more personal. "I was thinking about your father," I said softly.
He would have been so proud to see you." My husband, Robert, had passed away from a heart attack 10 years prior. His funeral was the hardest day of my life, the day Emily and I had to learn how to be a family of two. Emily's expression tightened. "Ugh, please, Mom, let's not get morbid. This is a happy occasion." It was as if I'd brought up a distasteful topic, like discussing a plumbing issue at the dinner table. My husband, her father, was now morbid. The wall between us felt a little higher, a little thicker. Then came the final blow. As the waiter brought the check, Emily's face clouded over. "Ugh, I completely forgot," she groaned, pulling out her phone again. "The string quartet just sent their final invoice. It's more than we budgeted for." She looked up, her eyes wide with the practiced innocence I knew all too well. It was the same look she used to get when she wanted a new doll as a child, or when she needed me to co-sign the loan for her first car. "It's just, with all the last-minute expenses, we're completely tapped out," she said, sighing dramatically. "I guess we'll have to cancel them. It's a shame. The walk down the aisle will be so quiet." James looked uncomfortable. We can figure it out." But Emily wasn't looking at James. She was looking at me. It was a test. A blatant, shameless shakedown veiled as a simple problem. My daughter was leveraging her own wedding to get more money out of me. The little hobby I had, the one that paid for her dress, the catering, the venue, it apparently needed to pay for this too. A part of me, the angry, wounded part, wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her to be a responsible adult, to stick to her budget. I wanted to ask her if she had any idea of the sacrifices I had made, not just for this wedding, but for her entire life. How I poured every spare dollar into her college fund instead of my own retirement. How I worked a second job on weekends for 2 years to pay for her study abroad trip to Spain. But then I saw the hopeful, anxious look in her eyes, and the anger dissolved into a familiar ache. This was my daughter, my only child. All I had ever wanted was for her to be happy. And if a string quartet was what it took to make the most important day of her life perfect, then so be it. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. My hand was steady as I wrote out the amount. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I'll take care of it. It's my pleasure." Emily's face lit up. She jumped up and gave me a quick, air-light hug. "Oh, Mom, you're a lifesaver. Thank you, thank you, thank you." She pulled back, her smile bright and genuine for the first time all day. "See, I knew your little consulting business must be doing okay." She said it as a compliment, but to me, it felt like a slap in the face. She had no concept, no curiosity, no respect for what I had built. She just saw an open wallet, a means to an end. As I drove home from that lunch, the quiet hum of my car felt deafening. I realized then that my hope of buying her respect was a fool's errand. I had paid for the party, but I hadn't earned a seat at the table of her life. I was just the caterer, the financier. And as the wedding day approached, I had a sinking feeling that my role was about to be made very, very clear to everyone.
I also have to give a special shout out to the mother of the bride, Margaret, she said, beaming in my direction. The spotlight operator, taking his cue, swung a bright circle of light onto my face. I blinked, feeling exposed. "Margaret is just an inspiration," Jessica continued, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "After a long and successful career, when most people would be happy to settle into a quiet life, Margaret decided to start her own little business. It's so enterprising." The word little hung in the air. I could feel the polite, patronizing smiles from the other guests. Jessica leaned closer to the microphone as if sharing a juicy secret. "I actually had my own brilliant startup idea a couple of years ago.
I even went to Margaret for some seed money. It was a fantastic concept, an app for curating artisanal dog toys. Very niche, very chic. She paused for laughter, which came right on cue, and Margaret, in her infinite business wisdom, gave me some very sound advice, Jessica said, drawing out the words. She told my business plan had holes in it and that I should do more market research. She turned me down flat. She laughed, a high tinkling sound. I was a little hurt at the time. I was thinking of getting a lawyer to look at my proposal. I was so sure it was a winner. But now I see she was just saving her pennies for more important things, like this incredible wedding. So thank you, Margaret, for your fiscal responsibility. She raised her glass to me. The room applauded politely. It was a masterful assassination, disguised as a compliment. She had painted me as a cheap, unsupportive old woman who played at business but didn't have the vision to recognize a brilliant idea. She had twisted my professional, responsible decision into a personal slight. I remembered that meeting clearly. Jessica's business plan was a 5-page PowerPoint with no financial projections and a target market of rich people with dogs. Turning her down was the only sane choice. I kept a serene smile plastered on my face, but inside I was seething. My knuckles were white where I gripped the stem of my champagne flute. I glanced at Emily, expecting her to look horrified, to be embarrassed by her friend's cruelty. But Emily was laughing. She was looking at Jessica with adoration, as if her friend had just told the world's most hilarious joke. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. At that moment, I knew it wasn't over. This was just the warm-up act. The main event was yet to come, and I had a terrible, sinking premonition that the star of the show would be my own daughter. After Jessica's speech, the microphone was passed around for a few more toasts. Then Emily stood up, tapping her glass for attention. A hush fell in the room. Everyone turned to the bride, her face glowing under the soft lights. I just want to thank everyone for coming to share this incredible day with us, and I want to thank our parents for making this all possible. She smiled at James's parents, then her gaze swept over to me. And of course, a special thank you to my mom. My heart gave a little hopeful flutter. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she would say something kind, something to undo the damage Jessica had done. My mom, Emily continued, a playful smirk on her lips, has been on a real journey of self-discovery these last few years. After she left her job, she decided she didn't want to just sit at home. So she started this little venture. It's her passion project. I could feel the eyes of 200 people on me. I felt like a bug under a microscope. We were all a bit worried at first, seeing her at the dining room table with all her charts and binders. But she's been so dedicated to it. We're all so proud of her, even if we don't quite understand what it is she does. She paused, letting the gentle laughter ripple through the crowd. This was it. This was the moment she could have defended me. She could have said, and she's been incredibly successful. She could have said, and I'm in awe of her strength. She said neither of those things. Instead, she leaned into the microphone, her eyes twinkling with mischief, and delivered the line that would shatter what was left of my heart. So let's raise a glass to my amazing mom, Margaret, and her new empire, making little air quotes around the word empire, proof that it's never too late to have a truly adorable midlife crisis. The room erupted. It wasn't polite, gentle laughter this time. It was a full-throated roar. People were clapping, cheering. They thought it was a loving, funny roast. They didn't see the cruelty behind it. They didn't see the years of dismissal, the constant belittling, the utter lack of respect, all culminating in this one public, humiliating punchline. My smile was frozen on my face. It felt brittle, like a piece of glass about to shatter. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a burning blush of shame. The room seemed to tilt, the happy faces of the guests blurring into a mocking kaleidoscope. I saw James's colleagues from Sterling Technologies chuckling at their table. I saw my own brother give a sympathetic shrug as if to say, "Kids, what can you do?" My daughter had taken my greatest achievement, the thing I had built from the ashes of my old life, and turned it into a joke for the entertainment of strangers. She hadn't just belittled my business, she had belittled me, my strength, my resilience, my intelligence, all reduced to a pathetic menopausal cliché. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap. It was a quiet, clean fracture. The part of me that had spent years craving Emily's approval, the part that was willing to write checks and bite my tongue just for a scrap of her affection, it simply died. The pain was so sharp, so intense, it was almost clarifying. It burned away all the hope, all the excuses, all the motherly love that had blinded me for so long, and what was left was a core of something hard and cold. It was steel. I looked at my daughter, who was now basking in the applause, blowing a kiss in my direction, and for the first time, I saw her not as my little girl, but as a stranger, a cruel, selfish stranger who happened to share my DNA. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I sat perfectly still, my back rodman straight, and I made a silent vow. She wanted to treat me like a joke? Fine, but I knew something she didn't. The punchline was coming, and I would be the one to deliver it. The party was just getting started. The applause for Emily's joke eventually died down, and the DJ turned the music back up. The happy couple moved to the dance floor for their first dance, and the world righted itself on its axis for everyone but me. For me, the world had shifted permanently. The soft and forgiving landscape of a mother's love had been replaced by the sharp and clear lines of a battlefield.
My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Sarah, my best friend since college and the only person in the world who knew the true scope of MW Ventures. "Are you okay? I can't believe she said that. Do you want me to cause a scene? I will cause a scene." Sarah was fiercely loyal, a pit bull in a cashmere sweater. The thought of her marching up to Emily brought a grim smile to my face. But a public confrontation was messy, emotional. What I had in mind was something cleaner, sharper, more corporate. I texted her back, my fingers moving with a newfound steadiness. "I'm fine, better than fine. And no, don't cause a scene. I have a plan." "What kind of plan? Margaret, what are you going to do?" "The best deals are closed with patience. Just watch." Putting the phone away, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt all night. The humiliation was a baptism by fire. I was no longer the mother of the bride, a walking ATM with a sentimental smile. I was M. Wilson, founder and CEO of MW Ventures, and it was time to act like it. I stood up from the table. A few people looked at me with pity, probably thinking I was leaving in tears. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't retreating. I was advancing. With my head held high, I began to circulate. I moved through the crowded ballroom with a grace and confidence that surprised even myself. I smiled. I accepted compliments on the beautiful wedding. But I wasn't just mingling. I was gathering intelligence. My first stop was the table where my brother, Robert, was sitting. He patted my arm. "Don't let the kids get to you, Mags. It was just a joke." "Was it, Robert?" I asked, my voice cool, because it didn't feel like one. He shifted uncomfortably. Robert was a good man, but a weak one. He'd never had much ambition, and my recent success, what little he knew of it, made him uneasy. It disrupted the family dynamic he was used to. I moved on. My real targets were the guests from Sterling Technologies, James's colleagues. I found them clustered near the bar, laughing and knocking back glasses of expensive scotch that I had paid for. I approached them with a warm, disarming smile. "Hello," I said. "I'm Margaret Wilson, Emily's mother. I'm so glad you could all be here." They immediately straightened up, their demeanor shifting to one of polite respect for the mother-in-law of their coworker. They introduced themselves.
a VP of sales, a project manager, a lead engineer. James is such a valuable member of our team, the VP said smoothly. We're all hoping he's on track for a big promotion soon. He has a great future with Sterling. I'm so glad to hear that, I said, my smile never wavering. It must be an exciting time at the company. I've been reading about all the changes since the acquisition. Their smiles tightened. The acquisition was clearly a sore subject. Yes, it's been an adjustment, the project manager said carefully. This new holding company, MW Ventures, they don't mess around. And the new owner, this M. Wilson, no one's even met her. She's like a ghost. All we get are these ruthless directives from on high. Ruthless? I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. How so? Just efficient to a fault, the engineer chimed in. Cutting dead weight, streamlining departments. It's smart, I'll give it that, but it's brutal. Everyone's on edge. I see, I said, nodding thoughtfully. Well, I'm sure a woman in that position has to be tough. It's a man's world, after all. They all nodded in agreement, comfortable in their shared assumptions. They saw me as one of them, or rather, as a harmless older woman who understood the old-fashioned way of the world. They had no idea they were speaking to the ghost herself. They were giving me a free, unvarnished report on my own company. It was more valuable than any board meeting. I texted them for the chat and moved on, my mind racing. My plan was beginning to take shape. It was risky. It could blow up in my face and make me look like a fool. But as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on my final target. He was standing alone by the French doors leading to the terrace, looking bored and important. Thomas Bennett, the CEO of Sterling Technologies, James's boss. He was the king on this chessboard, and I was about to walk right up and put him in check. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. This was it. There was no turning back now. Thomas Bennett was exactly what you'd expect from a tech CEO. He was in his late 40s, tall and fit, with a sharp suit and an even sharper haircut. He held his champagne flute like it was a prop and scanned the room with an air of detached superiority, as if he were analyzing data points rather than watching human beings celebrate. He was, to put it simply, a shark, and I was about to swim straight towards him. He saw me approaching, and his expression shifted subtly. He put on his polite and vaguely interested face, the one powerful men reserve for people they deem unimportant. He probably assumed I was going to gush about what a wonderful opportunity Sterling Technologies was for my new son-in-law. He was in for a surprise. "Mr. Bennett," I said, extending my hand. My voice was firm, my grip surprisingly strong. "I'm Margaret Wilson, Emily's mother. Thank you for coming." He responded, but I was immediately on to the next part of the script.
"You have a sharp mind for business, Mrs. Wilson," he said. And for the first time, he looked at me with something resembling respect. "What did you do before you retired?" The question was genuine, no longer just a polite formality. "I managed an office for a large firm for 30 years, I said, telling the partial truth. I learned a thing or two about how companies really run, about what happens when the people at the top are disconnected from the people on the ground. "Tell me about it," he sighed, swirling the champagne in his glass. "I feel like I'm flying blind, trying to anticipate the next move from a person I've never met." This was my opening, the perfect, elegant checkmate I had been setting up since I left my table. "Well," I said, leaning in slightly, my voice dropping to a confidential tone, "anticipating the next move is always easier when you understand the player. And I think I have a pretty good understanding of M. Wilson." "You do?" he asked, intrigued. "Do you know her?" I let a small, enigmatic smile play on my lips. "Oh yes," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "You could say we're very, very close." I watched as the gears in his sharp, analytical mind began to turn. I saw the flicker of confusion, the dawning curiosity, the slow, creeping suspicion. He was a shark, yes, but he was my shark in my ocean.
and he was just beginning to realize he was no longer the apex predator in the room. The conversation with Thomas Bennett shifted from the ballroom to a quieter corner on the terrace. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stuffy, overheated atmosphere of the reception. We stood near the stone balustrade, the manicured gardens stretching out below us in the moonlight. For a few moments, we were in our own little bubble, a world away from the music and laughter. Bennett was hooked. My calculated comments had sparked his professional curiosity, and now he was focused on me with the intensity of a CEO trying to solve a puzzle that could make or break his career. "So you know M. Wilson," he stated, his voice a low murmur. It wasn't a question. "Are you a friend? A former colleague?" "Something like that," I replied evasively. "Let's just say our interests are deeply aligned." I decided to press my advantage, to demonstrate not just knowledge, but an insider's perspective. "For instance, I know she was particularly impressed with your division's handling of the salary restructuring in the second quarter. It was efficient, but she's concerned about morale. She believes the engineering team feels undervalued since the R&D budget was slashed." Bennett's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This wasn't information from the Wall Street Journal. The specifics of the R&D budget cuts and the resulting low morale in the engineering department were internal matters, discussed only at the highest levels. Whoever I was, I had access. "How could you possibly know that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "As I said, I'm very close to the source," I said calmly. "M. Wilson believes that innovation is the bloodline of a tech company. She's worried that by prioritizing short-term profits, you might be sacrificing long-term growth. She's considering re-evaluating the leadership at Sterling." That was the kill shot. I had laid his deepest fear bare, that the ghost who owned his company thought he was failing. His face, usually a mask of corporate confidence, was now pale in the moonlight. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time all night. He took in my simple but elegant dress, my determined expression, my calm, steady eyes. He was a man who dealt in facts and figures, and he was frantically trying to make them add up. He thought back to the name of the holding company, M.W. Ventures. He thought back to my name, Margaret Wilson, M.W. I could see the exact moment the realization struck him. It was like watching a computer finally solve a complex equation. His jaw dropped slack. The champagne flute in his hand tilted precariously. "M. Wilson," he breathed, the name coming out as a strangled sound. "Margaret Wilson! My God!" He stared at me, his mind reeling. He was replaying the entire night in his head. My daughter's cruel joke, the condescending laughter from his own employees, his own polite dismissal of me just minutes earlier. He, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company, had been standing here, sipping champagne and making small talk with his new boss while his own people publicly humiliated her. The potential fallout for his company, for his career, for his employee James must have been flashing before his eyes like a horror film. "Mrs. Wilson, Miss Wilson, I had no idea," he stammered, his usual eloquence gone. "What you must think of us, of me." "What I think, Mr. Bennett," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel, "is that respect is the cornerstone of any successful business relationship. And tonight, I have seen a shocking lack of it." Right at that moment, as the full weight of his catastrophic blunder was crushing him, the music inside the ballroom softened. The DJ's cheerful voice boomed through the speakers, cutting through the tense silence between us. "All right, everyone, let's clear the dance floor. It's time for a very special moment. Let's have a warm round of applause for our beautiful bride, Emily, and her mother, Margaret, for the mother-daughter dance." The spotlight found us on the terrace. Emily, beaming from the center of the dance floor, looked towards me and beckoned me to come inside, a petulant, impatient look on her face. "Come on, Mom," her expression said. "It's time to perform your next duty." The universe had just handed me the perfect stage. All eyes were on me. The spotlight was a hot white circle pinning me to my spot on the terrace. Inside, Emily was waiting, hand outstretched, an expectant smile on her face. For her, this was just another box to check on her perfect wedding checklist. For me, it was the moment of truth. Thomas Bennett stood beside me, frozen in a state of horrified paralysis. He looked from me to Emily and back again, the color draining from his face. He understood what was about to happen. He was a witness at ground zero of a detonation he couldn't stop. I took a deep breath, the cool night air steadying my nerves. The steel that had formed in my soul that earlier evening was now my entire backbone. I walked out of the shadows of the terrace and back into the brightly lit ballroom, moving with a deliberate calm that silenced the expectant whispers of the crowd. I walked right up to my daughter, who stood in the center of the empty gowns floor. The opening notes of a saccharine, sentimental song began to play. Emily reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly firm, ready to pull me into the dance. I didn't take her hand. I let her fingers close on empty air. I stood before her, just out of her reach, and looked directly into her eyes. The smile on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Mom, what are you doing? Everyone's watching," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "I know," I said, my own voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence of the room. I made sure it was just loud enough for the people closest to us, including the table with Thomas Bennett, to hear. "But I don't think so, Emily."
"What are you talking about?" she asked, her confusion turning to irritation. "The dance," I said simply. "I'm not going to do it." Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. You're going to ruin my wedding?" "No, sweetheart," I said, and the endearment was laced with ice. "You already took care of that when you decided to use me as the punchline to a joke." I held her gaze, letting the weight of my words sink in. I don't dance with people who don't respect me. And tonight, you have shown me zero respect. I saw a flash of real panic in her eyes. This wasn't part of her script. Her mother, the reliable, accommodating, ever-present ATM, was refusing to play her part. Without another word, I turned away from her. I left her standing alone and exposed in the middle of the dance floor, the sentimental music still playing mockingly in the background. I walked directly back to Thomas Bennett, who looked as though he had just witnessed a car crash. His face was ashen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I was no longer the humiliated mother. I was the CEO. I was in command. "Mr. Bennett," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "My office, 9 a.m. on Monday. We have a great deal to discuss, including the corporate culture at Sterling Technologies and the conduct of your employees." His eyes darted nervously towards James, his employee, my son-in-law, who was now rushing to Emily's side on the dance floor, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. "Yes, Miss Wilson," Bennett stammered. "Of course, I'll be there." I gave him a curt nod. My part in this little drama was over. I had made my move. I had asserted my power quietly, decisively, and personally. Now it was time for the public announcement. It wouldn't come from me. It would come from the man whose career now depended on my goodwill. The final, devastating blow would be delivered by an undeniable, high-status third party, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he would not fail me. The DJ, bless his oblivious heart, finally seemed to realize something was wrong. The sentimental music stuttered to a halt. The silence in the ballroom was thick, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable. Everyone was staring, first at Emily and James, huddled in the middle of the dance floor, then at me, standing with a thunderstruck Thomas Bennett. Whispers erupted like wildfire, spreading from table to table. Emily looked like she was about to burst into tears of pure rage and embarrassment. She shot me a look of such venom it could have curdled milk.
She thought I had committed the ultimate sin. I had taken the spotlight from her on her day. She still had no idea what was really happening. Thomas Bennett, on the other hand, knew exactly what was happening. He was a man in crisis mode, and his executive instincts took over. He understood that this was no longer about a family spat. This was about corporate damage control. This was about survival. He saw his career, the company he ran, and the livelihoods of his employees all hanging in the balance, threatened by the colossal public disrespect that had just been shown to his new and clearly formidable boss. He didn't hesitate. He did something I hadn't anticipated, something far more effective than grabbing a microphone. He walked with purpose towards the small stage where the band had been playing earlier. He didn't run. He moved with the calm authority of a man in charge. He spoke briefly to the band leader, who nodded and quickly got the attention of his musicians. A sharp, crisp drum roll cut through the murmuring of the crowd, silencing everyone instantly. It was a sound that commanded attention. Thomas Bennett stepped into the center of the stage. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, trained for boardrooms and shareholder meetings, filled the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for just a moment?" he said, his tone perfectly modulated, calm, confident, and serious. He picked up a glass of water from the band's table and held it up as if for a toast. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate a new union, the marriage of Emily and James, and we have all been privileged to witness the start of their new life together." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "But I feel it my duty," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "to make another, equally important acknowledgement. We have spoken tonight about new beginnings, about passion projects, about empires." He let that last word sink in, his eyes finding mine across the room. I held his gaze, giving him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was his moment to fix his mistake. "It is a rare thing to be in the presence of a true visionary," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound sincerity. "A person who builds something from nothing, who sees opportunity where others see only obstacles. A leader who commands respect, not by demanding it, but by earning it through sheer brilliance and tenacity." He turned his body slightly, gesturing directly towards me. "Tonight, I have had the profound honor of discovering that such a leader is among us. So I ask you all to please raise your glasses. I would like to propose a toast, not just to the mother of the bride, but to a titan of industry, a woman of incredible substance and vision. I give you the founder and driving force behind MW Ventures, and I am both humbled and honored to say, my new boss." He looked directly at me and raised his glass high. "To Ms. Wilson." If the earlier silence was thick, this one was a solid wall. For the full 5 seconds, you could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. 200 minds were simultaneously trying to process what they had just heard. Boss? MW Ventures? Titan of industry? Then the wall shattered. A low murmur exploded into a cacophony of gasps, exclamations, and frantic whispers. People were turning to their neighbors, their faces masks of disbelief. The executives from Sterling Technologies looked like they had collectively been punched in the gut. My brother Robert's jaw was on the floor. And Emily just stared. Her face had gone from angry to confused to finally a ghostly chalk white. The blood drained from her face as the full implication of her actions, of her words, of her adorable midlife crisis joke came crashing down on her with the force of the tidal wave. This wasn't just a family embarrassment. This was a public, career-altering, life-defining catastrophe. The empire she had mocked was real, and she had just declared war on its queen in a room full of her subjects. The rest of the wedding reception was a blur of surreal, chaotic moments. The carefully curated atmosphere of celebration had evaporated, replaced by a thick fog of tension and frantic repositioning. Executives who had been laughing at me an hour ago were now falling over themselves to get to my side, offering me drinks, complimenting my dress, trying to engage me in conversations about market trends. It was a pathetic and transparent display, and I treated it with the cool, polite dismissal it deserved.
I avoided Emily. I saw her across the room, surrounded by her bridesmaids, her face streaked with ruined mascara. James stood beside her, looking helpless and horrified. He kept glancing over at me, then at his boss, as if trying to calculate the exact magnitude of the disaster that had just befallen his new life and career. I left without saying goodbye. I simply slipped out into the cool, dark night, got into my car, and drove home. The silence of the car was a balm, a welcome respite from the noise and the drama. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty. The victory was hollow because the battle had cost me my daughter. 2 days later, she called. Her voice was small, barely a whisper. "Mom, can I come over?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes, Emily, you can." She arrived at my house an hour later. It was the house she grew up in, a comfortable suburban home that felt too large and too quiet for just one person now. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was wearing sweatpants and a crumpled t-shirt. The perfect bride was gone, replaced by a broken young woman. We sat in the living room, a space filled with memories of happier times, birthday parties, Christmases, family dinners. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she broke. "I am so sorry, Mom," she whispered, the words catching in her throat as a fresh wave of tears began to fall. "I am so sorry. I was horrible. What I said, it was unforgivable." I waited, saying nothing. This was about more than just an apology for being embarrassed. I needed to understand why. "I don't understand, Emily," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "All these years, the dismissive comments, the jokes, the condescension. Why do you have so little respect for me?" "It's not about respect," she cried, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and confusion. "I mean, it is, but it's not. It's not what you think." She took a ragged breath. "Do you remember after Dad's funeral?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You were so lost. We both were. And then you just threw yourself into your job. You were always working, late nights, weekends. You were physically there, but you were gone. I felt like I lost you both." I listened, my own memories of that dark time flooding back. The grief had been a physical weight, and work was the only thing that kept me from drowning in it. I thought I was being strong for her. "I hated your job," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "I hated that it had more of you than I did. So when you got laid off, a part of me was happy. I was horrible, I know, but I was. I thought, finally, I'll get my mom back. I thought we'd travel, take those classes you talked about, just be together." Her voice broke. "But then you started this thing, MW Ventures, and you were gone all over again. Busier than ever. The dining room table was covered in papers. You were always on the phone. It felt like you had chosen work over me all over again. It felt like a rejection." She was sobbing openly now, her shoulder shaking. "So I got angry. I was hurt. And I was a brat. I belittled your company because I was jealous of it. I called it a hobby because I didn't want it to be real. If it was real, it meant you were really gone. The joke at the wedding was the stupidest, most cruel thing I have ever done. I was trying to hurt it, to make it small. And instead, I destroyed everything." It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession, a raw, painful explanation that reframed years of hurt. It wasn't that she didn't respect me. It was that she missed me.
Her cruelty was a twisted, misguided cry for her mother's attention. It didn't erase the pain she had caused. It didn't magically heal the wound, but for the first time in a very long time, it made sense. I looked at my daughter, this grown woman who was still, in many ways, the little girl who had lost her father. I saw the pain and the immaturity and the deep, desperate love all tangled together. The emptiness inside me began to recede. It was replaced by a familiar, heavy ache, the ache of a mother's love. It wasn't the blind, all-forgiving love of before. It was something new, something clearer, wiser, and infinitely more sad. I knew our relationship would never be the same, but for the first time since that horrible night, I thought that maybe, just maybe, it could one day be real again. In the weeks and months that followed, we began the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. Our conversation that day in the living room was not a magical fix. There was no tearful hug that erased years of pain. Instead, it was the beginning of a new, more honest chapter. I told Emily that I understood her feelings of abandonment, but that understanding was not the same as absolution. "Your pain is real, Emily," I said to her during one of our 10th carefully navigated phone calls, "but you are responsible for your actions. My life, my work, my happiness, they are not a reflection of my love for you. They are a reflection of me. And I will not apologize for my success or for the hard work it took to achieve it." I laid down new boundaries. Our relationship would no longer be a one-way street with me giving and her taking. It would be built on mutual respect, or it would not be built at all. It was a hard pill for her to swallow, but she was finally listening. She started seeing a therapist, something I gently suggested for years. She needed to unpack her grief over her father's death and her complicated feelings towards me. James, her new husband, was supportive. He had called me the day after the wedding, his voice shaking with apology and shame, and I believe his remorse was genuine. He saw me now not as a mother-in-law to be tolerated, but as a force to be respected. The corporate world, meanwhile, adjusted with breathtaking speed. My public unveiling sent shockwaves through the industries I had quietly entered. Thomas Bennett arrived at my office at 9 a.m. that Monday. He was humbled, deferential, and remarkably efficient. He had already drafted a company-wide memo on workplace respect and professional conduct. I didn't fire him. He was a smart CEO who had made a stupid mistake. I valued his skills, and I knew his loyalty was now absolute. He became my right-hand man, executing my vision for Sterling Technologies with a newfound vigor. 6 months after the wedding, my life was unrecognizably different. I stood in my corner office, a sleek, modern space of glass and steel overlooking the city's skyline. The dining room table felt like a lifetime ago. I was on a conference call, negotiating the final terms of another acquisition, my voice calm and confident. I was no longer playing at business. I was a master of the game.
My phone buzzed with a text. It was a picture from Emily. It was a simple selfie of her and James hiking on a trail, their faces flushed and happy. The caption read, "Thinking of you, Mom. Hope you're having a good day." It wasn't a grand gesture. It was small. It was normal. And it was more precious to me than all the apologies in the world. Our conversations were still sometimes stilted, the ghosts of the past lingering between our words. But the foundation was being laid, brick by painstaking brick. It was a foundation of honesty, not obligation, of respect, not resentment. As I looked out at the sprawling city below, a city full of stories, of struggles, of triumphs, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain of being discarded, the fire of being underestimated, the bitter sting of betrayal from my own child. It had been a brutal, painful path, but it had forged me into the woman I was today, strong, independent, unapologetic. I had learned that you cannot make someone see your worth. You cannot buy their respect or beg for their approval. True value isn't something that's given to you. It's something you build within yourself, brick by brick, deal by deal, boundary by boundary.
And sometimes the only way to make the people you love see the house you've built is to let them feel the steel of its foundation. You have to be willing to stand your ground, even if it means standing alone for a while. My empire wasn't a midlife crisis, it was a resurrection. And it was only just beginning. Thank you all for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but writing it all out has been healing. Does any part of this resonate with you? Have you ever felt like your sacrifices were taken for granted, or that you had to fight to be truly seen by your own family? I would be honored to read your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. Your stories matter.